thank you all very much for coming, and thank you, Mr. Walters. I didn't know exactly what kind of a talk to give tonight, and I think that rather than going too much into names and dates and places, I'll try to give you my impression of what things were like in the San Ramon Valley since the first white man came to this country. Probably the first one that we know of is, of course, the Fadges expedition in 1772. And when they came back through the valley and camped down by the Sunset Nursery down there, they probably saw a great grassy area, more big oak trees in the northern end of the valley, but as they worked down to the southern end of the valley, it would have been mostly open with scattered great white oaks and black oaks, and a great deal of grassland and very few creeks. There wouldn't have been any creeks to speak of at that time. The San Ramon Creek would have just been a swale, a grassy swale, probably a little bit marshy, and the San Catania Creek would hardly be definable except for maybe the grass and tules that might grow along that. And as the cattle were brought in by the Spanish and people started farming, then of course the soil erosion started to take place and the ditches were formed, the big creeks that we have in the valley now. But probably the earliest people saw almost the same animals that we are able to see around here today, except for the deer and the bear. There were probably mountain lions and wildcats and possum and raccoon and skunk, fox, coyotes, squirrels, rabbits, rattlesnakes, pigeons, doves, quail, as there still are in the valley, but you have to seek them out. And I've never personally seen an elk or talked to anyone that ever saw an elk in the valley, but I know that the last bear in, not in the San Ramon Valley, but at least in the area, was shot in about 1958 in somewhere in the hills between Lafayette and Crockett. So we did have bears here until relatively late times. We did, there were Indians, of course, in the valley, the Bull Bonnies tribe, and it's my understanding that they were very rough-featured, short, powerfully built Indians with black coarse hair, almost like horse hair, horse mane hair, and most part they didn't wear any clothes except in the wintertime. They may have put on a few animal skins, and they were to some extent quite a they weren't as advanced as most of the Indians in the United States, but they did give a lot of trouble to the early settlers, and I have a lot on Indians, but I think I'll pass that up. And we'll move on to the grants in the San Ramon Valley. There were two grants, and the first grant was given by Governor Figueroa to Bartholomew Pacheco and Mariano Castro, and that extended from the present Crow Canyon Road across the valley to someplace north of Alamo, and contained about 9,000 acres. And Pacheco and Castro were in the service of the Mexican and Spanish armies, and they had served in the Presidio, and as a reward they were given this San Ramon grant. And they were, the two men were uncle and nephew, and they split the grant up, and then they raised cattle on this area that comprised San Ramon, Alamo, Danville. And but the Indians were a problem for them. They didn't, as far as I know, or I couldn't find any records that they ever lived in this area. They ran their cattle here. They lived in Mission San Jose and Santa Clara, and they came up in the summertime and slaughtered cattle and took the hides and tallow, and they had some soldiers with them, and they loaded them in their wagons and took them back. And the other grant is also the San Ramon grant, but that was granted to Jose Amador, who also was a soldier and an explorer. He did a lot of exploring in North Bay area, and he was wounded in a battle with the Indians in Stockton, and retired from the Army, and he was given this, thank you, the San Ramon grant that extends from Crow Canyon south beyond Dublin. And he did build an adobe at, I'm not too sure about the intersection, but it would be almost the end of San Ramon Valley Boulevard, where it meets the old Highway 50 down there, right on the right-hand corner. And he started a little village there with Indians working there and other people, and so he lived right here on his grant. That was in 1833 and 1834 that those two grants were given. And some of the early settlers there, we could talk for days about the early settlers, but I'll just run over a few that might be typical of the people who came here at their very earliest times, and especially in the, I'll try to confine most of my remarks to the San Ramon area because that's where I live and I'm more familiar with that, and I can I'll speak with a little more authority on things that happened down there because talking to the old-timers, and I got a little more first-hand knowledge of that. So in the San Ramon area, the Norrises were probably the most important pioneers that we had, and they came from Kentucky and came to California in about 1846, and they did a little gold mining and then stayed around Santa Clara for a while and Mission San Jose, and then they moved up to the San Ramon Valley, and in 1852 they bought about 4,500 acres from Jose Amador for $10,000 and a white horse. And then in 1853 they built the old Norris house, which was the first house in our area, just a magnificent two-story house that stayed there until 1850 when it burnt down. And Leo Norris had 5 children: Mary, Ann, Emily, Jim, and William, who then inherited the ranch. And he was the father of George Norris, who was the father of Leo and Noli and Hattie Norris, the last 3 Norrises, who died just within the last few years. They lived, the Norrises lived alongside of us for all my life. I've known, and I especially knew George very well because I was a little kid. He used to babysit for me and for my folks, and well, he always reminded me that he was 50 years older than I am. So between the two of us, we have 110 years of memory of the valley. Then we have the Harlans, Joel and Minerva Harlan, and Joel came out. He was born in Kentucky in 1828, and then he came out to California in 1846, which, if my calculations are right, he was 18 years old, which was pretty young to, I thought, to be coming out to California. And he too wandered around California quite a bit, and then in 1852, about 1853, he bought a 1,000-acre parcel from the Norrises, from their ranch, and built the El Nido house, which I'm sure most of you have seen, a beautiful house where Harlan Gelderman lives now. And he built that in 1853. That would make him 26 years old. And it's a little amazing to me how someone that young can come to California and buy a big ranch and build a magnificent house like that at that early age. And then there were the Lynches, who were William Lynch came out about this same time, and he helped the Norrises build the first house in San Ramon. And then William Lynch bought a piece of land from the Norrises, and then he married the Morton Norris's daughter, so they were pretty well tangled up together there. There are many other early settlers. One I might mention, the David Glass ranch is farther down the San Ramon Road past the Wiedemann place, and on the right-hand side. And again, there's a house that was built. I don't have the date here with me, but in the 1850s, and still standing and being used in very good condition. Then, after the early settlers came, then the large ranches began to be formed in the valley, and one of them was the Doherty Ranch. And James Whit Doherty was a sheriff in Tennessee and came out to California, and he bought 10,000 acres from Jose Amador around the Dublin area for $22,000 in gold and, again, a white horse. And we were talking about this the other night. I know that he paid $22,000 in gold, and I'm sure Jose Amador wouldn't take a bank check or any of the U.S. Dollar bills. And what the mechanics were of acquiring $22,000 in gold, hauling it out to Dublin, giving it to Amador, and what he did with it, whether he buried it under his house or how he got it to a bank or some safe place before he was knocked off. I haven't been able to find out a lot of details like that I'd like to know. Anyway, then he bought, this Doherty bought another 7,000 acres from the Alviso grant, which is adjacent to that. So he had 17,000 acres there. And he started real agriculture there. He started to plow fields, and there are records of him having 119 single plows. There'd be 119 single horses, single plows, and men behind each one of them circling the fields down in the, where the Dublin and South San Ramon area is now. And then the ranch was inherited by Charlie Doherty, his son, and he had it for a while. Then another man named Carneal, which I guess was a relative, inherited a part of the place out in the Tassajara area, and he rented it to 4 tenants out there, gave them an opportunity to buy their ranches, and then when he died, he canceled all the notes and gave them the place. And 3 of the families are still farming the ranches that they acquired partially by gift. And then the Doherty Ranch was bought by the Gale and Donahue interest. Ray Donahue here in Danville is one of the Donahues that was involved in that. And we have been renting from the Dohertys and the Gales and Donahue since 1906. We rent the ranch from them. We've had a 1-year lease, verbal contract, so they're nice people to get along with. Then with him when he came to the country, and then he gave the slaves their freedom, of course, and a 90-acre piece of ground just on the corner of Tassajara Road and Finley Road. And the 2 people are the slaves, not slaves anymore, but they're buried up on a little knoll right at the corner there. And then down a little further, there's the Woods Ranch, one of my favorite ranches. There's very nice people there, and I see there's a lot of Woodses here tonight, so I'll have to be very vague about what I say. But I was out talking to George the other day, getting some information from him, and he talked about Leonard Eddy, and we were out in Krell's there, and he pointed over, and that's Leonard Eddy's house, and that's the first time I'd ever seen it, and sure enough it is. And Leonard Eddy had gone out there in 1850, and I assume that he just walked out Sycamore Valley Road, came to a place that he liked. There were some trees there and probably a little water in the creek and some nice land, so he just stopped right there and built a house. And you have to imagine that in 1850, which doesn't really seem that long ago in light of what has transpired since, but there was nobody there. There was just nobody. He could have walked for 25 miles and never saw a soul in 1850. Anyway, he built this house, and if I don't have this straight, correct me, but then the Mendenhalls came along, and they, by that time in the 1852 or 3, the titles were a little bit better out in that area. There there was no surveys. There were only, California had just become a state, and there were some township corners, which I think are about 6 miles apart, so they weren't very good for surveying smaller parcels. But by that time, some surveys had been made, and it was a little easier to acquire title. So the Mendenhalls bought the place, and then the Woodses acquired the place from the Mendenhall sometime later. And it was kind of interesting to me how they put these ranches together. Most of them started with 160 acres, and many of them were pieces that were given to former soldiers. They were able to acquire a quarter section, or you could prove up, get a patent on a quarter section. And then, of course, the railroads, when they came through, they got every alternate section through the country. And on the Woods Ranch, I was surprised. George told me that one of the sections belonged to University of California, and of course that's a land-grant college, and I suppose all over the state there are sections of land that either the university still owns or have sold to build the university to its present status. And then we come up a little bit further to the Black Hawk Ranch. I think you've all heard of the Black Hawk Ranch. And that was put together by the Easton and Ward, and they had a ranch in Burlingame, and they came over here to raise cattle and horses, and they bought from the Wilsons and the Eddies and Goulds and Bells, and Fairfields and Matsons and some others. I didn't get the names of it. And that was about in 1914. And they built those big horse barns and a big house, and they raised shorthorn cattle and Shire horses out there. And Bill Ward, who we knew very well, said that they had gone to Europe every year for 22 years to buy stock for their ranch and new bloodlines of cattle. And George told me that one of the bulls that they had bought, and they had it shipped out to Danville, and the bull cost them $20,000 in England. I imagine the bull must have come in its own private car or something, but George had just acquired a truck in those days, and he was asked to haul this bull from Danville up to the Black Hawk Ranch. And George said he was pretty nervous about that, because $20,000 was probably all the equity that most farmers had in their ranch, livestock equipment and everything else. And of course the Wards fell on evil days like many of us did in the Depression, and they had to sell the place. And they lived with us for 5 or 6 years, and the place was sold to a man named Force, and then Castle and Cook bought it, and Howard Peterson, and finally the Black Hawk Development Company has acquired it. Another ranch is the Railroad Ranch, or the Diablo Country Club, and that was it was called the Railroad Ranch because of so many railroad people were involved in it, especially Charlie Crocker in 1877 was the first one that kind of started that area. He bought the first piece. Well, he bought it in 1876 for delinquent taxes. And then he held it from 1877 until 1880, a period of 3 years, and that time it had been sold 5 times. And then Daniel Cook bought it, and he was the man that built all those magnificent barns and stables and corrals. He built the 1-mile trotting track that's down kind of on the corner of Green Valley Road and Diablo Road. And he expanded the ranch from Green Valley Road to almost the top of the mountain, including 4 miles of toll road. And then he died, and it was inherited by his daughter or niece, the Boyds, and they were the people that built the present Diablo Clubhouse, which they had built for the entertainment of their friends. It had a casino and a billiard room and 3 bowling alleys, I think, and it was and still is quite a little place. Until then, it was sold to the Oakwood Park Stock Farm. And I don't know who they were, but they didn't have much success with the ranch. And I know George Wood tells me that he was up there in the early 1900s, and the thing, all the barns and equipment, everything was in very poor shape. And then that outfit failed, and the Boyds took the ranch back again, and they sold it to R.N. Burgess, a local businessman and developer, for $150,000. And Burgess immediately expanded the ranch through his owning corporation to 13,000 acres, going right up over the top of Mount Diablo, and including the road, the north road that comes in from Ignacia Valley, and the road, of course, up to the top of the mountain from Diablo. The roads, by that time, the old toll roads had collapsed, and the hotels had burnt down. So Burgess had built, he started to build the roads up the mountain. And in those times, that was in the 11, 12, 13, there was a lot of land speculation, and there was quite a boom in land sales. And Mr. Burgess got the idea of subdividing the Diablo, or the old Cook Ranch, where the Diablo Country Club is now. And he was able to get the Oakland, Antioch, and Eastern Railroad to build a track out from Saranac, just out of Walnut Creek, down along the road from Walnut Creek through Alamo and Danville, and then curved around and went up to the clubhouse in Diablo. And I haven't been able to pinpoint it exactly, but if my memory serves me right, I think we're right on top of the railroad here. It came right down Harts Avenue and circled right around here and went on up to Diablo. And that railroad ran from 1914 to 1924, and when the whole thing folded, and then eventually the thing was subdivided, and you have your Diablo Country Club up there. And the agriculture in the valley was first, of course, the cattle raising of the original grant holders, and that's all they did was just raise cattle. But then later, as other farmers came in and began to, had experienced farming in the east or picked it up here, they began to raise grain, which was then the major crop, because grain is fairly easy to raise, and it's you can concentrate it, it's easy to store, easy to ship, and it doesn't spoil in storage, and there was a good demand for it. And then people began to discover that fruit trees did very well in this valley, and there was a boom in orchards. It was the whole valley here, the Sycamore Valley and the Green Valley and Stone Valley, were all full of apple orchards, pears, almonds, prunes, olives, and vineyards. And they did very well until well, the time of the orchard started in the San Joaquin Valley, and they got irrigation down there, and they were able to produce them a lot cheaper than this area could. And about that time, then the walnut industry started in the San Ramon Valley, and most of the other fruit orchards had gone except for the pear orchards, and the whole valley was full of walnut trees as it has been up to the present. Then when the railroads came in, also the hay growing became a big industry, because hay is pretty hard to transport in any way except on big trucks or by railroad cars. So there was a great demand for hay, because the cities were beginning to build up and needed, there were great drayage firms in San Francisco and Oakland, San Jose, that needed a lot of hay, and so that most of that hay was supplied from the San Ramon Valley because of its quality and because its nearness to the market. A little about transportation. The roads were pretty bad, and even I can remember the roads being very bad. It wasn't until relatively recent times that there was any gravel on the roads. They were just plain old dirt roads, and in the summertime with the stagecoaches and the hay wagons and the spring wagons going through, there was a cloud of dust. There was a pad of dust maybe 6 inches deep on them, and you could just barely see your horse ahead of you when you went down the road, and in the wintertime, of course, it was just the reverse. It was at least 2 feet of mud, and if it was a bad winter, well, you just didn't go out very much because you just couldn't hardly maneuver on these roads. But they were gradually improved, and eventually the Highway 21, as it was always, as has been known in the past anyway, was built with a bond issue from Walnut Creek to Dublin, and it was a 2-lane concrete road, but it was unique in that it had a very large divider strip in the middle of it. It had a strip about 3 feet wide, and then it went up in a big hump like that. And if the car in front of you was going 15 miles an hour, you were able to maneuver the hump and get around and pass them. Otherwise, you just didn't. And it stayed that way for a long time. And then in a few years, that was chopped off so that it was only about 4 inches high, but was still a good hump there until it had stayed there until the road was finally paved all the way down. And then in 1893, because of the pressure of the produce that was in the valley here, the railroad came in, and in 1893 they built the railroad to San Ramon, and then in 1907 they continued it on to Pleasanton. And there were stations in San Ramon and Danville, and intervening stops. The Danville station is still here, Joe Ramos's feed store, and the San Ramon station has long gone now. And then there was one other one that I mentioned before, the affectionately known as the Toonerville Trolley. That was the all-electric train that came from Saranep up to Diablo. And it had just one car, and it was a converted 1873 baggage car. And half of it was baggage, and the other half was were passengers. I don't even know if there were seats in it. I think there were benches in it. And I know, talking to Andy Anderson, said his mother used to go on that once in a while, but she didn't go any more than she needed to because it always made her seasick, because it was such a poor finance road that they couldn't do anything about the trackage, so the thing was pretty bad. My uncle used to ride it quite a bit, and he said in the wintertime, of course, everybody got on with an umbrella in case it rained, because the rain came right down through the roof, and you just sat inside there and held your umbrella on the train. And when it was cold, they had a big wood stove in the middle of it, and he said one day when he was going to Walnut Creek, they hit a particularly bad section of track. Of course, the wood stove fell over, and all the coals fell out and started to catch the floor on fire, and he and another guy ran over and got some couple of buckets of water and put the thing out. Anyway, it ran from 1914 to 1924, and I remember seeing it as a kid, and of course I wasn't very sophisticated, but I saw it coming down Harts Avenue, and it had to be the biggest, scariest thing I ever saw in my life. It was just rocking and making a terrible noise for an electric car. Well, maybe I'll say a few things about the old town of San Ramon, which is typical probably of other towns in the valley and other places in California. And it was a good-sized town, talking about the 70s and 80s. I'll just read you a little list of things I made up here. There was 3 hotels, 4 saloons, 2 blacksmith shops, 1 Chinese laundry, 1 livery stable, 2 general stores, 1 Methodist church, 1 school, 1 jail, 1 stage line, 1 shoemaker, 2 doctors, 1 dentist, and a post office, which is a pretty good-sized town. And by 1915 or so, everything had burnt down, and there was only a general store and a school left. San Ramon had several names. It was named Bruinsville and Lynchville, and Limerick, and then finally San Ramon. It had its post office in 1852, and at that time it was called Bruinsville Post Office, Lynchville Post Office. Down the time until 1884, it was finally officially named San Ramon. We had a school in 1852, a rather small school at that time, but it grew, and then the school originally was held in a couple of homes, and then it was moved down to a blacksmith shop, and then it was finally over to the San Ramon School that was where the rock place is in San Ramon, and it was typical school of that time. It had 2 rooms, and it had outside toilets, of course, and hand pump out in the yard, and a big horse barn, because everybody came in their horse and buggy and rode saddle horses. And it had 10 grades, and it had 120 students. The 120 students, they range in age from 5 years old to 22 years old. People didn't have to go to school, and they went to school when they could or when the work wasn't too pressing it back at home. And when my father and uncle went there, they said there was 120 students, and when I went there were only 25 students, mostly because of the consolidation of the ranches. When there were a lot of 160-acre ranches, and people made a living on all of them, and gradually economics dictated that you couldn't do it. You had to have 240 or 480 or a section, or maybe 2 sections to make a living. And we had a shoemaker over there. You can take a look at it. That's one of his old shoes that he made for my father, Peter Thorpe, and he had a shoemaker shop right on the main street of San Ramon. And it was a delight for me to go in there when I was a kid with my father to get his shoes, because it was a typical shoemaker shops in that he had his cobbler's bench, and he had a bunch of old hides, not old hides, but new hides, thrown over in the corner, and he had a great big tub that he soaked the hides in before he cut his shoes out. And then on the shelves on the wall, he had the lasts that are hand carved of all of his customers, so that everybody got a custom-made shoe. And well, my father got shoes from him for as long as he was in business, and when he finally went out of business, my father always had very poor feet anyway. He always had foot trouble, and when he was finally forced to go down to J.C. Penney and get some shoes, all his feet trouble disappeared. Then we had Dr. Alexander and Dr. Laborie, and Dr. Dragoo was the dentist. And in those days, they did make house calls. And my father tells about when he was a little kid, he broke his collarbone, fell off a horse, and Dr. Alexander came to the house and set his collarbone, and then he strapped his arm to his chest and said, just leave it like that for 6 weeks and it'll mend right back together, and that was fine. And 6 weeks later, Dr. Alexander came back and took all the bandages off and grabbed my father's arm and stretched it right out. And my father said that was the first time he saw all the celestial bodies in all their glory and the exploding planets. And his sisters were surprised that he had picked up some of the words that weren't mentioned in front of him. And Dr. Dragoo, he came up and pulled one of my grandfather's teeth. And I guess that's the way they operated, right on the floor. They got the patient down on the floor, and all the family sat on the different appendages of my grandfather, and my uncle was the biggest one in the family. He sat on his head, and Dr. Dragoo just reached in with a pair of pliers and popped out the tooth, and it wasn't, well, it's horrible to contemplate. And let's see. I better bring this to a close here. We had an old town hall in San Ramon that maybe some of you remember. It has only been going a few years. It was built in around 1900 by local subscription, and they had card parties, school plays, and especially dances was the principal reason to build the thing. And I remember when they used to do the Berlin and the Schottisch and the two-step, and the whole building would just bounce up and down. I thought that the whole thing was going to collapse. And then in one of the, they used to have Mabel Christensen, maybe some of you know her, from Livermore, and she used to come with her three-piece orchestra and play for the dances, and they had a piano and an accordion and a drummer, which was not unusual, except the drummer was stone deaf, absolutely stone deaf, and I don't know how he faked it, but it sounded all right anyway. Then we had 4 saloons in San Ramon, and I missed the saloons. That was before my time, but they were very popular meeting places, especially for the men, and they were a necessity. If you were driving up and down these dusty roads, you had to stop by a saloon and get steamed beer every once in a while, and the steamed beer was 5 cents and the whiskey was 10 cents, which may sound kind of high, but that included a free lunch and a towel to wipe your face at the end of the bar there. Well, then we had a livery stable, just one livery stable, and it didn't last too long because one of the, my uncle told me that one of the kids of the owner was ordered to go out and get the eggs from the hens on the back of the livery stable, and one of the hens was setting and he was having trouble getting it off the nest, so he got the bright idea maybe he'd smoke it off of there. So he started a little fire, and he did smoke it off all right and burnt the livery stable down, but it wasn't a complete loss because there were a couple of apple trees right alongside of it, had ripe apples on it, and everybody got baked apple for a few days off of there. Yeah, we had a Chinese laundry, which was a necessity in an area like San Ramon, there were so many single people, single farmers, and stage drivers, ranch hands that had to have, certainly couldn't do their own laundry and send it out to the Chinese laundry. And around that time there were, after the building of the railroads and the mines had slowed down, there was a lot of hard feelings about the coolie labor, and anti-Chinese leagues were formed all over the state of California. And I'm sorry to say there was one in San Ramon, and it was very active for quite a few years until cooler heads prevailed and they threw the thing out of town. And then when Grover Cleveland was elected president, he was the first Democratic president in 20 years, so that called for a celebration, and there wasn't much else to do around San Ramon, so a celebration gained favor with everybody. So they gathered down in the schoolyard, and somebody had killed a beef, and they barbecued the beef and had beans and beer and whatever went with it. And then they had John J. Irish. He was a local politician and a real spellbinding orator, and he gave an oration. Then they fired off the anvils, and everybody got so excited from all the beef and the beer and the orations, they all jumped in their wagons and buggies and paraded up and down the main street of San Ramon there until everybody fell of exhaustion. Yeah, then we had the general store, the one that has lasted the longest. It was just demolished a couple of years ago. It was right alongside of the present fire station in San Ramon, and that had been owned by the Peels and the Glasses and the Hearsts, and the Ferreras were the last owners and operated. Bill Ferrer was the postmaster, and Billy Ferrer, his son, is the present fire chief in San Ramon. And it also had the first gas station in our area in about 1918, 1920, why there were a few automobiles around, and so a gas station was a necessity. And Mr. Hearst's son, Harry, took care of that part of the business, but one day he wasn't there, and a fellow drove up and said that he needed a quart of oil for his car, and old man Hearst had seen this operation but never had really participated in it, so he went in the shed and got a quart of oil, came out and lifted up the hood and looked around in there, and he saw that kind of a hot, rusty old engine in there, so he just poured the quart of oil right over the top of it. I don't know if that satisfied the customer or not. And in that same store, there was a politician from Walnut Creek who was running for Board of Supervisors. And as politicians are wont to do, he was handing out his cards and shaking hands and buying cigars. And one of the men he offered his cigar to was Chris Bollinger from Bollinger Canyon. And he said, "Would you have a cigar, Mr. Bollinger?" And Mr. Bollinger said, "Well, thank you very much, but I raised my own tobacco up in the canyon, but if it's all the same, I would like 10 cents of shingle nails." It was this same Bollinger one spring decided to go back to Missouri to visit his relatives, and he and his 14-year-old daughter just struck out and walked all the way to Missouri, and the next year they walked all the way back again. And she was always known, she grew up in the San Ramon area and always known as Little Miss Transcontinental. I've got a lot more stuff, but it's getting late, and I thank you very much for your attention.